Hi, I'm Caroline Leavitt, and I'm the co-founder of A Mighty Blaze, the book initiative that began the day of lockdown to help writers like me whose tours were canceled, to help bookstores whose doors were shuttered, and to just be connective tissue between writers and readers and indie bookstores. We have a very special guest today, Ellen Feldman, who, I had her book right here and I can't find it, but you can see the gorgeous, gorgeous cover she has, The Trouble with You. We're going to be talking about that. Oh, thank you for holding it up, Ellen. Before I introduce Ellen, I just have a few house cleaning things to say. First, if you have any comments or questions, please just pop them in the chat. Also, you will know that you can buy any of Ellen's books at bookshop.org or at your favorite indie. This particular interview will be recorded. It's going to live on A Mighty Blaze station on YouTube forever. And also, I just have to tell you that tonight at 8 o'clock, A Mighty Blaze is doing, once again, our book recommendation show where all the hosts will be there, most of us, and we're all going to be talking books and recommending them. And right now I'm recommending Ellen Feldman's The Trouble with You. Ellen Feldman is a remarkable writer. She's a 2009 Guggenheim Fellow. She's the author of The Living and the Lost, Paris Never Leaves You, which was translated into 13 languages, Terrible Virtue, which was optioned for a feature film, The Unwitting, Next to Love, Scottsboro, shortlisted for the Orange Prize, The Boy Who Loved Anne Frank, a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice, and Lucy. This book, The Trouble with You, has just been published in the United States. It was originally published in Australia and called A Life of Her Own. It's incredible. It's about the 50s and the role of women and the blacklist and ambition and why that was not such a good thing for women in the 50s. And mostly it's about this woman named Fanny. She comes of age after World War II, which was a very different time for women. During the war, women actually went out and they took jobs and they worked and they were strong and they liked it. And then when the men started coming home from the war, well, everybody thought, well, the women have to go because it's the man who needs the work, even though women did too. So Fanny gets a job on one of the soap serials that was very popular at the time. And like a lot of those women, she found that she loved it and she didn't want to give it up. As her ambition soars, she's in this world of blacklists and the fear of communists, and she finds herself breaking the rules. It's just a wonderful book. I absolutely loved it, and I think all of you will too. So let me read you some of the high praise. Kirkus Review says, Feldman has created a compelling woman who knows her own mind and insists on using it. Kirkus Reviews. Booklist says, rich and colorful characters. Feldman's riveting tale is one of resilience, determination, and hope. Stacy Schiff, New York Times bestselling author, says, an indelible novel suffused with heart and history, fresh, fast-paced, and exhilarating. I think exhilarating is actually the right word. And let's see, Anne Hood, the New York Times bestselling author of Fly Girl and the Knitting Circle, calls it a big-hearted novel. And Kevin Baker, author of Dreamland, says that Feldman is at the top of her game, displaying a perfect grasp of the post-war era, its politics, her characters, and the human heart. So welcome. I'm so happy to have you here, Ellen, talking about your book, which, as I said, I absolutely loved. Thank you for being here with us.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, you know, I absolutely, I'm always curious about what drives or haunts a writer into writing the book that they're writing. What made you think that this was the book that you personally wanted or needed to write about a woman in the 50s and the blacklist and all the rest?
This book was a longer time germinating than I realized. I mean, it was kind of percolating beneath the surface. I had been working on another book. I was about 100 pages into another book, and I just felt I felt it was derivative. I had written it before, and it was like painting by the numbers, and I was tired. And suddenly, this started to take shape in my mind. in a sense, this is a very personal story. It's personal in the sense that the rules and the stringencies against women, the remnants of them were still around when I was a young woman. They were beginning to fade, but not much. But I grew up. My mother was widowed when she was very young. She was 39 when I was 7, and I remember. Obviously, I remember much about that, but I remember vividly hearing people who came to pay condolence calls and stuff saying, "At least she doesn't have to work. Thank heaven she doesn't." I mean, that was supposed to be a blessing. But not until I guess I was a and in college and graduate school did I realize, hey, this isn't a blessing. This is a curse. My mother would not have got over my father's death or being widowed or anything like that. It would have been better for her to get a life outside of the home because
That's right.
as Fanny in the book, my mother had been raised to be a wife and mother, and suddenly she was only half of those two things, as is Fanny in the book. Her husband comes home from the war, and she's been raised to be a wife and mother, and suddenly she's only a mother. And not only is she only a mother, but she has to go out and get a job to support herself and her daughter. And this was not an easy thing to do after the war.
No, no, it definitely wasn't. Also, the whole thing, I can remember my mother was the only mom in the neighborhood who worked. And there was a lot of gossip around it, like, why does she have to work? And in the end, it was that job that really saved my mother and gave her a life, and she liked it. And after my father died, she kept working and she loved it. But at the time, it was, women don't work. And in fact, my mother always used to say to me, women shouldn't have to work unless they want to, which I
Yeah,
guess was sort of a step up, but
yeah.
not such a big as that. So I wanted to ask you also about the research. The research you did is phenomenal. There were so many little things that I didn't realize, like in the help wanted sections, there were female and there were male. And I actually looked them up and to find that a lot of the descriptions for the female were, they would ask for pretty, perky woman to do this and this and this, something they would never do with a male. So I wanted to ask you, tell us, like, what surprised you the most about the research? What was totally unexpected for you to know?
I don't think anything was totally unexpected, but there were times when I'd be in the library and I'd say, "Oh my heavens, I can't believe it." The book begins with 4 epigrams, and one of them is from the then president of Radcliffe. And he was a man, of course, and this is the 50s. He welcomed every incoming class of Radcliffe, telling them that what they would learn there would make them better wives and mothers, and their reward might be marrying a Harvard man. And
Oh God.
so blatant, it just drove me crazy. And the last epigram is from a best-selling book of 1947, written by a male journalist and a female doctor, and it's called, I think, "Women: The Failed Sex" or something like that. And it talks about how sex for a man is an active an act. It's an active act. Okay,
Right.
for a woman, it's not only passive. It's not as easy as rolling off a log. You are the log, he says, or they say. And I
Oh, okay.
And there was a lot of that sort of. One thing came back to me. I mean, I read a lot of the magazines telling young girls how they had to be totally unreal to please the boy, learn his interests, and talk about what interests him.
I remember that.
Yeah, I came back, and one minor thing came back that you never, and this happens in the book. You never, when you go out with a man, a date, or a husband, you never give for dinner. You never give your order directly to the waiter. I'm not sure why you can't talk to a waiter. You tell your husband or your date what you want for dinner, and he turns and tells the waiter.
The
And
lady will have blah, blah, blah. Right. Okay.
In the book, Fanny jokes about it, that perhaps, it's not only is it not ladylike to talk to the waiter, but maybe if she says, I want steak, the man will say, no, dear, steak is a man's dish. You have the chicken. Which,
Oh,
well,
it's
actually,
it's
sometimes
fascinating.
yeah, it was just so, and the idea too of the men who would not permit their wives to work. I mean,
Right.
absolutely laid down the law. I will not have my wife working. People will laugh at me. They'll think I can't take care of her or my family. It was really these were what was so amazing as I thought about this and as I was writing it is after the war, 12 million men came home, took off their uniforms, and the country was terrified that we'd have an unemployment and a depression. So the laws, I mean, they actually, not the laws, but the temper of the times was women should go back into the home so men can work. Even if women needed to support families, the men needed to more. Um, but what happened was society internalized these strictures. So Fanny in the book is fighting not only against the world and other people who are telling her you shouldn't work and you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that. She's fighting the rules she was brought up with. She's
That's
fighting
right.
the old habits, and that's the really difficult battle. Not against the outside world, against what has been poured into you. And that was, difficult to wrestle with.
It is difficult. I mean, I saw that kind of thinking. Oh, my mother grew up with it, but I saw that kind of thinking where my mother would say things like that to my sister. Like, "Oh, your husband will be furious if you don't do the dishes well." And I would always say, "Well, have him do it if he doesn't like the way she's doing it." And there would be this moment of
Yes,
shock. And what I worry about now, and I'm wondering how you feel about it, is today we have a backlash against women and what women should do, what their role should be, who should control their bodies. And I felt like your book was almost a little prescient in terms of, that this feeling is not going to go away. I mean, women made tremendous advances and now they're trying to be pushed back. Does that worry you? I mean, of
oh,
course it worries you, but I mean,
yeah.
do you think that it's going to push forward again, that we can regain the things we've lost?
I think I believe that history it swings in it's like a pendulum. Things go
Right, right.
one extreme than the other. I'm hoping. I'm terrified of how bad it's going to get, and then I'm
Yeah.
hoping the pendulum will begin to swing back. You use the word I always do about this book. I wish I could say I was prescient. I wasn't. I had no idea, but there were two things that it turned out to be that way. The one, the pushback against women, that we're losing ground. The other is the blacklist in this, that
Right.
librarians are being fired, teachers are being fired, books are being taken out of libraries. I mean, I never dreamed when I started writing about the blacklist that we'd be back in that mindset. That is frightening too. I won't say one is more frightening than the other. They both terrify me.
They do. They tell. We have an audience question, which is, let's see if we can get it up. Do you feel like this is like The Handmaid's Tale at all? Which is that's kind of an interesting question, because I know Margaret Atwood, when she wrote The Handmaid's Tale, said that she wasn't writing about anything that had not been in society already. And given that, and given your book, why aren't people paying more attention to what could happen? I mean, I think there is a section of women and of men who are scared about the future, but I feel that we're headed towards The Handmaid's Tale. Do you feel that, or do you have more hope than I do?
No, I don't have a lot of hope either. I mean, I think that young women, especially, and I'm not criticizing. I mean, this is very funny. A few months ago, I was walking down the street, and two young women stopped me, and I thought they were selling me something, and I said, "No, no, no," and kept walking. I was getting to the library, had to get to work, and then suddenly. I realized a few feet away that what they were saying is they wanted me to sign a petition for one of them to run for office. And I turned around
Oh,
and I said, "Yes, I definitely will. I'm so happy that you are interested and you're working."
good.
So I'm not suggesting the younger generation is less interested or anything. I just think for a lot of young people, they're so caught up in their own personal lives and struggling to get ahead in their careers or taking care of young
Right,
kids.
right,
Very, very hard. But I also think I think there are a lot of women. I think more so in the last year or two when things have gotten worse. I think there
right.
are women who are really enraged and are out there. I'm doing research now about 1991 and the Clarence Thomas hearings, and after that,
Oh,
1992 came the year of the woman when suddenly women were running for office again, or not again for
right.
the first time. So I think I guess I do have some hope. I just want to be here to I want to be alive. I want to live through to see the pendulum swing back.
Me too. I want to talk. There's so much in this book about the Red Scare and communism and McCarthyism. That was a term. That was a tremendously terrifying period for America and for people. But people really were terrified of communism. Can you tell us about the Red Scare and how it led to McCarthyism, and then tell us about Fanny's relationship to all of that, because that's really interesting.
The relationship, I'm sorry, I didn't.
Fanny's relationship, like how she's moving through it, because it McCarthyism led to the blacklist, which I would love for you to talk about also, and the blacklist actually led to an opportunity for Fanny.
Yes. It did. That's not why I mean,
No,
she did.
no, it's not why she did it, but it just inadvertently led to it.
I think it's interesting, and I just thought of this the other day, and I don't have an explanation for it. After World War One and after World War Two, we had Red Scares, and I'm not sure why. One One can say, communism after World War II, Russia had, the Soviet Union had been our ally, but I don't think that explains it. It's something about coming home and wanting normalism, and I haven't thought enough about this. We did have it, and I'm not sure what led to McCarthyism. I think people were frightened. I think it's easy to stir up people. It's happening to us now. It's easy to stir up people about the other. The trouble is coming from the other, and we don't want them here, and all of that. The blacklist it's interesting, and McCarthyism. I mean, they're obviously connect. They're the same thing in a sense. One is just formalized. We think about kind of the interesting, the glamorous, the sexy people who were
Right,
caught on the blacklist, the Hollywood 10, and there's
right. The Hollywoods people.
all of this. It's very glamorous, and we've all read books about that. What I find amazing is the people, the unknown people, I said, the librarians, the
Right.
teachers. They were especially vulnerable to this because they were thought to influence young minds. If only they do, we hope. And so they're these unknown, known only to their friends and families and loved ones who lost their jobs. And this, I mean, I won't say there was a contagion of suicide, but certainly there were more suicides than I think we know about during that. I did read about one very sad. He was a professor, and I don't think he was indicted. I think he was just questioned, and he left a wife and three small children. He just was devastated by this, and I think that happened more than we know, um, and and we have the potential for that again.
That's right. Some states want to make librarians responsible for if they promote books that the states
Yes,
want censored, or they could be arrested. It's absolutely terrible. You have
exactly.
an audience comment from Robin Stahl that's really interesting. Robin says, I never ever thought that Roe v. Wade would be overturned. Many people just don't realize the far reaching effects. It's not just about abortion. That's right. With the computerization of health records, privacy, and such, some states are already proposing travel restrictions and punishments for women traveling for health care. Yeah, that's a really astute comment. It's terrible. It's terrible. And the one thing that nobody is talking about is that none of these restrictions are ever put on men. It's always on women.
Exactly. I mean, it is amazing that men if well, men just do not get punished this way because the men are
Right.
making rules.
Because they're in, right.
When the comment just now that these things, it's a slippery slope after Roe v. Wade. And I wrote a book earlier, Terrible Virtue, about Margaret Sanger, who went to jail repeatedly to
Right.
try to make birth control legal in this country. And there was an article in the paper maybe a month ago that the laws, the Comstock laws, the national laws,
Right.
are they're thinking of using them again to stop sending medical abortions through, the abortion pills through the mail. And the next thing is contraception. And that's
Right.
exactly
Right.
what she was
That's right.
fighting. That's
It's,
exactly what Margaret Sanger was fighting.
and again, it's all centered on women, not
Yes.
men, which is totally unfair. And then, of course, we get into other things where you know, anybody who is different from the main male white Christian, it's not a great thing. So I want to move on and talk about the whole issue of the birth of the cereals or the soaps, which are so much fun and so funny. Um, Also, I learned that you went to soap school, so I would love to hear about that, and then explain the whole history of the soap cereals for us.
Oh, I'm not sure I know the whole history. They go back to the 20s and the beginning of radio. I did a little reading about it, but I'm not an authority, certainly. I will say my soap school experience, what's so ironic about this is it was a very unpleasant experience. And totally,
Oh,
yeah, I totally repressed it until I needed a job. Fanny needed a job. I needed a job for Fanny. And I didn't want to go back to some of the areas I had written about. And I didn't want her to go into fashion or beauty or anything like that. I just,
right. That's two
yeah,
women.
yeah.
Right.
So she found this job. Somehow it came to me. And as I was writing it, I remembered when I was starting out as a novelist, I had published perhaps one novel. And I walked into my agent's office one day and she said, I was just about to call you. I have an offer. She didn't say an offer you can't refuse. I have an offer. One of the networks one of the networks had decided they would hire two novelists and two playwrights, young both, and train us in writing soaps. It was like 6 or 8 weeks for the summer. And we get paid during this time. You know this, Caroline. A novelist starting out, you're going to give me a paycheck.
That's right. Well, no
I
matter
said,
what it is, we want it.
yeah. And what happened was that it wasn't a lot of fun writing it. We worked with a head writer, and there was a funny dynamic there because he wanted to show us that it was an art form, writing soaps. We were four obnoxious young people who were going to show him he had nothing. We were slumming. We were doing this just for money. We lived through the summer, and at the end, none of us got hired to write permanently on the soaps. And I think I don't regret that.
It's a good thing, probably.
But one of the things, and I have an article in Lit Hub about this, that the main thing I remember from it is the commercial break. I mean, he talked about building suspense. Now, we thought we knew about suspense. We had published books, had plays produced, but no, this was real suspense. You had to stop every scene once it got started, or every conversation. You had to stop dead in the middle so they'd hang up, so the viewer or the listener would hang on through the break. And the funniest thing about this is years later, I was teaching a course in fiction writing, and we won't go into whether you can teach that or not. And there was a woman who was quite talented, but she had a habit of breaking off in the middle of every scene. And
Oh,
I suddenly said, "Did you ever write for the soaps?" And she said, "No, but I acted in them." And
so she knows.
she was conditioned this way. And then we started to talk about it, and she broke herself of the habit. And I'm happy to say 2 years later, she published her first novel.
Oh, great. Excellent. It's funny because in the 80s, the TV stations were actually offering a course in writing for the soaps. And the only reason I didn't do it was because they didn't pay you and you had to go 8 weeks without
Yeah.
my job, and I couldn't do that. But before I said no, I was watching the soaps, and I remember it's exactly what you said. Not only did they stop at the middle, but there was so much repetition.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
they would like loop around, like Jenny would discover she was carrying her brother's baby. And then at the end of the half hour, she would discover it again.
Yes.
And it hooks you. I always wondered how easily it was to hook you in and yet be so, you know, not great literature at the
No.
same time, but it does what it was meant to do. And I loved it that Fanny was good at it and she liked being good at it, which leads me to another question about the book, which I loved, which was female friendship, deep female friendships, how women help one another. I'd love you to talk about that between Rose and Fanny and any other groups of women, any other women in the book that have friendships like that. I just found that it was, no matter what the era, women sustain and help other women.
Yes. I think it's funny. I didn't think of Rose and Fanny as friends. Of course they are, because they're their aunt and niece. But of course they're
But they are.
close friends, very close, and very important in each other's lives. And Rose is she wants Fanny to benefit from her what she has learned and from her experiences, which of course it's very difficult. We all want that for
Right,
other
right.
the next generation, and it rarely happens. It did happen somewhat with Rose, and then it happens again with the next generation when Rose doesn't even know. She does. Rose is trying to get these messages across both to her niece and to her great niece, and it's important that they're the kind of, both Fanny and her daughter Chloe are the kind of women and girl who can learn from these
Mhm.
experiences and are receptive to Rose, because there's another character in it. She cares. She and Mimi are very fond of each other, and Mimi wants the best for Fanny, but she's not receptive to these messages, to Rose's message. She's much more conventional, and Rose has always been a rebel. So I think I think I hadn't. I mean, it just came naturally to me writing, but I think now talking about it, that I think whether you're receptive to a message or not is extremely important. And obviously, some people are set in their ways, and some people say, "I never saw the world this way. Thank you." Or they don't say thank you, just, "Oh, how exciting."
Right. I want to talk about your writing process. I always want to know from writers is when you're moving from book to book, and certainly you've written many acclaimed novels. Do you feel that you're learning new lessons from writing one that you can apply to the next one, or do you feel like it's a totally different process for each novel?
That's an interesting question. I hope, and I think I have, that I've learned with each book. I read some of my earlier books now, and I think, "Oh, why did I leave that in?"
Really, you do? That's fascinating.
I mean, the joke has always been that if I could, I'd run around from bookstore to bookstore after the book was published, crossing things out and changing margin. Um, so I think I've learned and I've gotten better. The hardest thing for me is when I start a new book, I find I'm writing the last one.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, I know that feeling.
It's difficult, and part of that, I think, is getting to know your characters.
Right.
Someone asked me in an interview about the beginning of this book, The Trouble with You, and that almost before I started writing, as I started writing, I knew the beginning. I knew how this book had to begin. Usually, I don't know that, and usually the beginning is so hard for me that I throw out chapter after chapter, just trying to find my way into the story and to get to know the characters. Frequently, and maybe you know this too, Caroline, you think you have a character and you think, "Oh, this is going to be the perfect character for this book." And the character just lies there on the screen and
Right,
won't get up
right.
and do anything, doesn't say anything interesting, and is terrible.
Exactly, exactly. I have more writing questions, but you have an audience question again from Janet Schneider. Fascinated how Fanny finds a niche writing for the radio serials. Was there an inspiration for Alice, a fabulous character?
Um, I that's an interesting question too. The inspiration for Alice was not a serial the head writer. Oh, that's not true, come to think of it, because when I did some research about the early, I was working for television soaps, and when I did some research about the early radio soaps, the women. So I guess there was an inspiration. The women were very strong women, very strong,
They
very
have to be.
yes, and exactly they were. Because men were running,
Right, right.
and they were very tough, and they built empires. I mean, I forget now who she is, but well, there was the man who had the most soaps and wrote the most all along. Had the most programs and wrote, as Alice does, millions of words a year for this. What he was a man, but there were women like this, and it was unusual. And they had to be tough as nails, and that intrigued me.
It's so cinematic. I mean, I can see this spilling out as, a limited series or a film or something, because just the whole idea, all you would have to say to somebody is women working on early soap opera serials in an age where women didn't really work, and everybody would tune in. Everybody would tune in. I hope that you have film interest on this, because it's very cinematic and wonderful and wonderful. So, what's the worst piece of advice you've ever gotten about writing or about being a woman in society? And
Oh,
then what's the best?
okay. Um, I don't know that I've had bad advice about writing. I've had terrible advice about being a woman. It was be a nice girl, be a good girl, behave yourself, never speak up. I'm sitting here at my desk, and a friend gave me a little sign that says, "Well-behaved women rarely make history."
Right.
Yes.
That's
So,
true.
yeah. So that was, as far as writing, I don't think this is a piece of advice about how to write. I think it was a piece of advice when I had worked in publishing, and I got fired, and I should have been fired. I was the worst
Wow.
person known to mankind. I was not good at the job. I didn't understand publicity, and I basically wanted to write. I think I
Right.
resented all the time that
That's the issue.
yeah, and a friend who was an editor said, all I've ever heard you talk about wanting to do is write. Why don't you go home and start to write?" And,
That's
so
wonderful.
yeah, I free and come to think of it, I had forgotten this. The editor-in-chief of the house I worked at, one day I was in his office on a publicity matter, and obviously he knew I wasn't any good at it. He said, but then I was still employed. I hadn't worked. He said, "Why don't you go home and write a novel?" And I like to think that he thought I could write a novel, and not that he thought I was just terrible at publicity. But, it was I think what I'm saying is they just said, if you really wanted to I tell
Right.
the writers, if you don't have to write, don't try
Don't.
don't, because it's so hard in so many ways. But if you can't not write, if that's what you have to do it. You just have to keep at it. You get rejection. You know this, Carolyn. We get rejection.
Oh, yeah.
We get our heart
Yeah,
broken.
yeah,
We get it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, because I know this of a lot of other writers too. We've all been fired from most of our other jobs
I think
because
of that.
we're not good at it. I also tried to do PR, and I was not good at it. I used to write for public TV. Terrible, just terrible at it. And most of the time it was, writer sensibility. I never wanted to go out with, advertising or marketing people or
Yes,
anybody. I wanted to go home.
exactly.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you, can you talk about what historical period is grabbing your interest now? Like, can you talk about what you're working on now, or are you able to work on anything while you're busy promoting your book?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, no, I lost a publication date was 2 weeks ago, so I haven't gotten much work done around that.
Right.
As you know, it takes a long time for a
Yeah.
book to come out after you finish it. So I gave myself a little, I always say I'm going to take off a lot of time. I never do. I'm like
Yeah.
Clark. If he stops swimming, he dies. If I stop writing, I get totally crazy. Um, so I have been working, and I don't like the term historical fiction, because what I'm really writing about most of the time is the 20th century, which was second half of the 20th century was my century in many ways. And I'm working on a book that starts in 1963 and goes up to 2022. So it covers a lot of territory.
Livegram.
Yeah, and it's about a young woman and her two friends who were passionately involved in politics. So you see some of these very important events through their experiences, their eyes, but their experiences and their setbacks and this sort of thing. And it's about, I hate to say something like this, it's about America and America's love affair with the Kennedys and with certain aspects of politics at that time. But as you can't write a novel about America. You have to write a novel about
Right. People, the characters. Yeah, I think you're right when you say that about, the term historical fiction. Historical fiction, whenever I hear that, I think, oh, it's going to be women in, period costumes of the
yeah,
time or whatever. But that's not what it's about. It's simply we're all humans, and it's about how do you be a human in a specific time in history rather than making the story historical almost. It's always all about the characters.
yeah,
And it's the same thing with sci-fi. It's not about, I have students who will write about sci-fi and they'll make it all about, the planet Xylon and all this stuff. And I recently had one student who wrote a fabulous book because it was all about the characters, even though it was way ahead in the future. And you're right, it was like it was about now, even though it wasn't.
yes. I mean, human nature doesn't change that much.
Yes, that's
The
right.
outside factors we're reacting to change, but human
Right.
nature is pretty eternal.
That's right. Okay, so I always ask this question to every writer who comes on the show because I, of course, am a totally obsessive person myself. What's obsessing you now and why?
Well, what's obsessing me during my working hours is the political events of the
Yes.
yeah. What's
Yes.
obsessing me after and before work, when I'm an early riser, when I start to read the paper, is our political scene. I'm terrified.
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
terrified what's happening to this country. And I think I'm obsessing about that more than anything. I never thought I would live to see democracy in America threatened. I don't think of myself as a tremendous patriot. I'm just I think there's a danger in a certain level or kind of patriotism, but I've always been very, very grateful that I was born here and was able to grow up here and have the advantages I had. I never thought I'd live to see them threatened the way I see them now. And
It's terrifying. It's totally terrifying. Well, I want to tell everybody once again, you can pick up The Trouble with You, which is just a fabulous novel. It's moving, it's provocative, it's funny, it's totally exhilarating. It really is. Just go to your favorite indie, or you can go to bookshop.org and it'll get sent right out to you. I want to also tell you that this interview is recorded. It will be on the Mighty Blazes YouTube station forever, so you can watch it again and tell your friends. Later tonight on an extra special Litvic, which is at 7 for the first time, I'm going to be interviewing Zibby Owens about her new book, Blank. And then at 8 o'clock on A Mighty Blaze, we'll be having our book recommendation show. So tune in. Thank you all for being here. I want to thank Ellen. This was like such a fabulous conversation. Thank you so, so much. Can you just hold up your gorgeous book cover again for everyone to see? Because it really is beautiful.
they did a beautiful, my publisher
I
did.
love it. It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Yes.
And thank you all. And I'll see you all either later today or tonight or next time we're on. So bye, everybody, except for you, Ellen. You stay on.